My name is Ingrid Halvorsen, and I'm 38. The night it happened, I was standing at the edge of the ballroom wearing a dress I'd chosen because my husband said the navy made me look composed. I remember thinking that was an odd word. Not beautiful. Not elegant. Composed. I filed it away the way I'd learned to file most things he said, quietly, without comment, without letting it touch my face. The Meridian Grand sat on the waterfront in Astoria. It was a converted cannery, all exposed steel beams and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the Columbia where it widened toward the Pacific. On clear nights you could see the bridge lights reflected in the water. That night was not clear. Rain moved against the windows in slow diagonal sheets, and the ferry horn sounded twice from somewhere in the dark, low and distant, like a warning no one was meant to hear. 400 people filled that room. My husband Callum's employees, his board members, his investors, his suppliers. Round tables draped in white linen. Centerpieces with white flowers I couldn't name. A string quartet in the far corner playing something no one listened to. The air smelled of cedar and candle smoke and the salt that never quite left Astoria, even indoors, even in winter. I had helped plan this gala. That is not a small statement. I want to be careful with it because I have learned, in the years since that night, that people assume things when a woman says she helped plan something. They picture her on a phone in a bright kitchen, nodding along while a caterer made decisions. That is not what I mean. I had spent 4 months in the logistics of it. The venue contract. The catering bid. The audio-visual setup. The seating chart that required 3 revisions when 2 of Callum's board members had a dispute I was not supposed to know about. I had driven down to the Meridian Grand twice in November, once in December, once in January, in weather that made the coast road slick and narrow, to walk through the room and confirm what we'd agreed to on paper. Callum had thanked me for it. Once. Briefly. The way you thank someone for holding a door. I stood near the edge of the room with a glass of water I hadn't touched. I watched him work the tables. He was good at it. He always had been. He moved through a crowd the way water moves through rock, finding the easiest path, never forcing anything, always ending up exactly where he needed to be. I had admired that once. By that January, I mostly watched it with something closer to distance. His name was Callum Osgood. He ran a marine logistics company his father had founded, a mid-sized operation out of Astoria that handled freight coordination for commercial vessels along the Oregon and Washington coasts. It was a real business. Unglamorous. Tide schedules and port fees and the particular bureaucratic language of Coast Guard compliance. He'd grown it in the 8 years we'd been married, added a second terminal up near Grays Harbor, hired a team that now ran close to 60 people. I knew the company's rhythm almost as well as he did. Not because he'd invited me in. Because I'd been paying attention for 8 years. I noticed her the moment she entered. That is true, and I want to say it plainly because I think it matters. I didn't have a premonition. I wasn't watching for her. She simply walked into that room with the particular ease of someone who knew she was expected, and something in my chest went still. Her name, I would learn later, was Petra. She was his executive assistant. She had been with the company for 14 months. I had met her twice. Both times at the office, briefly, professionally. She'd been polite. Efficient. She had a way of answering questions that gave you exactly the information you needed and nothing else, and I had thought, both times, that she was very good at her job. She was wearing a dress the color of champagne. She crossed the room directly toward Callum, and I watched her reach him, and I watched him turn toward her with a smile I recognized. It was not his professional smile. It was the other one, the unguarded one, the one that arrived before he'd decided to deploy it. I set down my water glass on the nearest table. I didn't move yet. My name is Ingrid Halvorsen, and I grew up on the water. My father, Rida, ran a boatyard outside Astoria for 30 years. Not a big operation. 16 slips, a dry dock that could handle 3 vessels, a small fabrication shop where he and 2 other men built custom fittings for commercial fishing boats and the occasional private commission. He worked with his hands and he kept meticulous records, and he believed that the difference between a man who lasted and a man who didn't was whether he paid attention to the things no one was watching. I absorbed that. I didn't know I was absorbing it, I thought I was just following him around a boatyard. I studied accounting at Oregon State. Took a position afterward at a marine insurance firm in Portland, working on commercial policies for the fishing and freight industries. I was good at it. Not because I was particularly brilliant, I don't say that falsely, but because I understood the vocabulary. I'd grown up hearing it. Dry tonnage. Hull coverage. Survey dates. Vessel age and condition as variables in a rate calculation. The men I worked with had to learn what I already knew, and that gap never closed entirely, even when they'd been in the business longer. I met Callum at a marine trade dinner in Portland. He was 31. I was 30. He was charming and direct, and he asked me 3 questions about commercial hull policy in the first 20 minutes, which was the fastest way to get my attention. We dated for 2 years. We married in a small ceremony on a stretch of coast near Seaside, on a gray afternoon in October, with my father and my sister and Callum's parents and about 40 other people. Callum's parents. His mother was Dorth Osgood. 64 when we married. She had the particular quality of a woman who had arranged her life very carefully and resented any element that had not been arranged by her. She was not cruel in obvious ways. She was precise. She asked questions that were not questions. She offered help that was not help. She said, of course, in a tone that meant the opposite, and she had been saying it to me for 8 years. His father, Henning, was quieter. He had founded the company and handed it to Callum when his health declined, and now he sat on the periphery of most family events and watched things without commenting. I had more respect for him than for Dorth, though I had never said so to Callum. It would not have landed well. The thing Dorth had decided about me, early and permanently, was that I had married into the family's position without earning it. I was not from money. My father had a boatyard. My mother had worked the front counter of a marine supply shop in Warrenton until her knees gave out. These were honest things. I was not ashamed of them. But Dorth collected facts the way some people collect debts, and she had decided that mine said something definitive about my category. She never said this directly. She said it in other ways. In the way she described my background at dinners. Ingrid's father ran a small boat operation, very hard-working, with the particular emphasis on small that made the whole sentence into a distance measurement. In the way she discussed the business in front of me as though I were a guest who happened to be present. In the way she had, at Callum's suggestion, been given a nominal advisory role on the company's family trust, and had used that role methodically to suggest that certain assets be structured in ways that benefited Callum's family line without technically requiring my signature. I had seen what she was doing. I had said nothing about it. Not to Callum. Not to anyone. I had a key on my keychain that Callum didn't know about. It had belonged to my father. It opened the original office at the boatyard, a small cedar building set back from the slips, where he had kept his records for 30 years. After his death, 2 years into my marriage, I had sorted those records. I had found things in them that I had not expected to find. I kept the key. I kept the folder inside the office. I kept the information. I didn't know yet when I would need it. I need to tell you what the 8 years looked like from the inside. Not the version I gave at family dinners, which was smooth and plausible and left nothing out that wasn't supposed to be left out. The actual version. The version made of specific days and specific amounts and specific hours that no one saw because I had performed them without asking to be seen. When Callum's company expanded to Grays Harbor in the 3rd year of our marriage, I spent 11 weeks that autumn going through the acquisition documentation. He had hired a business attorney, which was right. But the attorney was generalist, and the specifics of marine freight licensing had gaps that would have created compliance problems within 18 months. I found 6 of them. I wrote a detailed memo. Callum presented the corrections to his attorney as his own concerns, which I had expected and which I did not make an issue of. When Dorth's hip replacement required rehabilitation the following spring, I drove to her house in Seaside twice a week for 6 weeks. 90 minutes each way. I brought meals I had prepared the night before because she preferred home food to what the rehabilitation service offered. She told me once that the soup was too salty. I said I would adjust it. I adjusted it. She did not comment again. When Callum's financial records became complicated in year 5, a dispute with a port authority in Warrenton over a mooring fee structure, I spent 3 weekends building a documentation binder that his attorney used to resolve the dispute without litigation. The binder took me 40 hours. The resolution saved the company $340,000. Callum told his board he'd pulled it together with the team. I was not the team. I was not mentioned. The Warrenton property came up around that same period. Callum and I had purchased it jointly in year 2 of our marriage. A modest parcel at $187,000, access road adjacent to the Harbor Authority's secondary dock, the kind of thing that seemed unremarkable at the time. By year 5 it had already begun to appreciate. By the time of the gala it had reached something close to $748,000, mostly because the dock access had become commercially significant as the secondary terminal expanded. Dorth knew the value. She had always known the value. The trust revision in November of year 5 was, I understood now, partly about that property. I am not telling you this to perform grievance. I am telling you because I want you to understand what I was made of by the time that gala happened. I had been doing the work of someone who mattered to this family while being treated as someone who was tolerated by it. And I had been doing it long enough that I had stopped expecting it to be acknowledged. Dorth attended the gala that January. She was at a table near the front with Henning and 2 of Callum's board members whose wives she cultivated carefully. I had greeted her when she arrived. She had looked at my dress and said I looked well-rested, which was the compliment she gave when she couldn't find a compliment. I had said thank you and moved on. I managed the early part of the evening the way I had managed every Osgood Company event for 8 years. I checked in with the catering supervisor at 6:17 p.m. to confirm the dietary plates were correctly flagged. I spoke briefly with the AV technician at 6:34 p.m. about the timing of the founder's reel. I introduced myself to 3 of Callum's newer employees who didn't know who I was, because no one had introduced them to me, and I had decided, years ago, that invisibility was only a problem if you allowed it to be. At 6:58 p.m., I went to the restroom near the north entrance, took 2 minutes to myself, and looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. I looked composed. In the years before my father died, he used to say that the sea doesn't care what you think of it. It doesn't reward feeling. It rewards preparation. He said it about weather. He said it about hull maintenance. He said it about contracts and suppliers and the people who promised things they hadn't measured. I had thought about that a lot in the 8 years of my marriage. I dried my hands and walked back into the ballroom at 7:03 p.m., and that was when I saw Petra's arm go around my husband's waist. I stopped 4 tables away. She leaned up and said something close to his ear. He laughed. It was the unguarded laugh. The one I hadn't heard in 2 years. A woman nearby noticed me noticing. She looked away quickly. That was its own kind of information. I walked toward them. The string quartet had shifted to something slower. The rain was still moving against the windows. The room had the particular noise of a crowd that has had 2 drinks and not yet 3. Loud enough to feel festive, quiet enough that a conversation in the open carried. Petra's arm was still around Callum's waist when I stopped beside them. He saw me first. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Adjustment. The expression of a man reorganizing a room quickly before a guest enters. Ingrid, he said. You've met Petra. We've met, I said. Petra looked at me with the same efficient politeness she'd used both times at the office. Except her arm didn't move. That was new. Mrs. Osgood, she said. You've done a beautiful job with the event. Thank you, I said. I looked at her arm. I looked at Callum. Callum, I said. Can I speak with you? It was not a question. He shifted. We're in the middle of something. You can finish it after. Petra's expression changed. Not dramatically. A small tightening at the corners of her mouth that could have been amusement or could have been something else. She didn't step back. I don't think she wants to let you go, she said to Callum. As though I were not standing there. I kept my voice even. I'm sorry, I said. Are you speaking to me or about me? Petra looked at me directly then. She tilted her head slightly. I'm just saying what I see, she said. Callum's told me how things are. Has he? He has. She smiled. It was a small, certain smile. He tells me a lot of things. I said nothing. Callum put a hand on Petra's arm, not to move her back, I noticed, but the gesture of a man managing a situation he'd allowed to develop. Let's not do this here, he said. I'm not doing anything, Petra said. I'm having a conversation with your wife. She looked at me again. Isn't that right, Ingrid? The use of my first name was deliberate. I registered it. If you have something to say, I said, say it. She smiled again, wider this time. All right, she said. Callum's mentioned that you have difficulty with your role here. At these events. He says you tend to micromanage. My role, I said. The supporting role, she said. The wife's role. At a company event. She said it the way someone says a thing they've rehearsed, clearly without heat, as though they're simply reporting a fact. I looked at Callum. His jaw was tight. He was looking at a point slightly above my head. That's an interesting description, I said. Given that I organized this event. You helped, Petra said. I planned it. That's not how Callum described it. I turned to Callum. Is that how you described it? He didn't answer immediately. The pause lasted long enough to be its own answer. Ingrid, he said. You're making a scene. I'm asking you a question. You're raising your voice. I had not raised my voice. That was true and he knew it. I'm standing in a ballroom I booked, I said. Asking my husband a question. This isn't the place. Then where is the place, Callum? Because I've been looking for it for about 2 years. Petra made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. The kind of sound that is designed to be heard by the person it's aimed at. I turned to her. Step away from my husband, I said. The room around us had gone quieter. Not silent. But the particular kind of quiet that happens when people nearby stop pretending not to listen. I was aware of it without looking for it. I had grown up at a boatyard where men had arguments in close quarters and the whole dock always knew what was said. 2 employees at the nearest table had stopped talking. One of them, a man I recognized from Callum's operations team, a young logistics coordinator named Bram who had been with the company 3 years, had set down his fork. He was looking at the tablecloth. He was not looking at me. But he was listening. Petra looked at me for a moment. She's serious, she said to Callum. The tone was light. Amused. She's actually serious. Petra, Callum said. His voice had shifted. Harder now. But not at her. You know what your problem is? Petra said to me. She spoke quietly, evenly, the way someone speaks when they want the words to land without the volume to mark them. You've been here for 8 years and you still don't understand what this company is. It isn't yours. You didn't build it. You married into it. There's a difference. And everyone in this room knows it. I kept my face still. My stomach dropped. Callum built this, she continued. His family built it. You've been along for it. And that's fine, that can be fine, but you can't stand here in this room and act like you're something you're not. That's what makes you. She paused, and the pause was deliberate. That's what makes you look pathetic. The word hit the air between us. Someone nearby heard it. I could tell from the quality of the silence that followed. One of those invisible shifts where the sound doesn't change, but the attention does. Bram's fork was still down. The woman beside him had leaned slightly backward. I said nothing. Petra, Callum said again. She asked me to say what I had to say, Petra said, without looking at him. Still looking at me. I'm saying it. I looked at Callum. Are you going to say something, I said, or are you going to let her continue? He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He looked at me and then at Petra and then back at me, and I watched him make a calculation that had nothing to do with what was right and everything to do with what was easier. Ingrid, he said finally. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't answer. You come over here, you insert yourself into a conversation. I walked toward my husband, I said. You made it into something. She put her arm around you, I said. In front of your employees. In front of your board. That's not. She called me pathetic, I said. In front of 400 people. His jaw tightened. She was making a point. Was she making your point, I said. Or her own? He didn't answer. Because you told her, I said. You told her I micromanage. You told her how things are. You said that. To me. Just now. Which means you've been having conversations about me. With your executive assistant. About my role. In my own marriage. The quiet around us had spread. I was aware of more people listening now. Not just the nearest table. The next one over. A cluster of employees near the bar who had gone still. We're not doing this here, Callum said. You said that already, I said. Ingrid. Step away from my husband, I said again to Petra. I won't say it a third time. Petra looked at me. Then she looked at Callum. Something passed between them. A look I recognized from the outside, from the far side. Of 8 years, and she moved her arm. Not quickly. Slowly. The way someone does a thing when they want you to see that they are choosing to do it, not that they've been made to. She stepped back half a step. I looked at Callum. Thank you, I said. He stared at me. The thanks had confused him. Good. I want to ask you one question, I said. One. And I want you to answer it in front of these people because I think the answer matters to them. Ingrid. The venue contract for this event, I said. Who signed it? He said nothing. The catering agreement, I said. Who negotiated the per head rate? Still nothing. The AV company, I said. Who drove down in January in the rain to confirm the equipment placement? His jaw moved but nothing came out. Because your executive assistant said I helped, I said. And you didn't correct her. So I want to know if that's what you actually believe. That I helped. That I was useful. That I was present and willing, and that constitutes helping. You're doing this in public, he said. His voice had gone flat. You're choosing to do this in public. I didn't choose any of this tonight, I said. You walked over here. I walked toward my husband at his company's gala. In the room I organized. He said, that's enough. It's not, I said. The Grays Harbor acquisition. Year 3. The compliance gaps. Who found them? His face changed. The Warrenton dispute, I said. The documentation binder. 40 hours. Who built it? Ingrid. I want you to answer me, I said. Once. In front of these people. Who did that work? He looked at the table. He looked at Petra. He looked somewhere to my left where I knew, without turning, that more people had stopped moving. You did, he said. It was very quiet. I did, I said. I said nothing else. Petra was watching us. Her arms were at her sides. The champagne-colored dress looked different now. Something had shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly, but the expression of someone who has been given one account of a situation and is now looking at the actual situation and finding they don't match. Callum said, "Are we done?" "No," I said. He exhaled. "What else?" "I want to know why you let her speak to me that way." She called me pathetic, I said. In front of 400 people. You were standing next to her. I didn't ask her to say that. You gave her everything she needed to say it. He was quiet. You told her my role, I said. You described my marriage to her. You characterized me to your employee. And then you brought her here tonight and you let her stand next to you with her arm around you and you let it go until it became this. It became this because I walked toward you, I said. He stopped. That's what made it this, I said. I walked toward my husband. The room was very still. The string quartet had stopped at some point, I wasn't sure when. The nearest tables were not pretending anymore. I could see one of Callum's board members, a man named Eirik Strand, watching from 3 tables over with his hands flat on the white linen. Dorth had risen from her chair. I saw her in my peripheral vision, moving toward us with the particular walk she had when she intended to manage something before it managed itself. She was 40 feet away. She would reach us in another 15 seconds. Callum said, "I think you need to." What happened next happened quickly. He stepped forward. I thought for a moment he was going to step between us. He didn't. He raised his hand and struck me across the face. Not hard enough to knock me down. Hard enough that my head moved. Hard enough that the sound was audible, a flat, dry sound, in the quiet that the conversation had already created around us. I stood still. My cheek was warm. My eyes had watered involuntarily, which is a physical response to impact and not a feeling, and I want to be precise about that. I stood still. Somewhere to my left, a woman made a sharp sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Then the room erupted. Not in shouting, in that particular eruption of crowd noise that is the sound of 400 people all choosing a response simultaneously, and somewhere in that noise I heard laughter. A few voices, close together, near the back. Laughter. I didn't look for it. I didn't look at Callum. I didn't look at Petra. I stood still and I let the room be what it was. Callum's face had changed. He looked for a moment like a man who had surprised himself. That was the only honest thing on his face in that moment, and I noted it the way I noted everything, without letting it change my own expression. "Ingrid," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't. "Don't," I said. He stopped. I reached up and touched my cheekbone once, lightly, with 2 fingers. Then I lowered my hand. Dorth had arrived. She stopped 2 feet away, and I felt rather than saw the shift in her face when she understood what had just happened. She looked at Callum. She looked at me. She did not look at Petra. "Callum," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Step back." He stepped back. He did it the way people step back when someone else has done the thing they needed to say. I watched Petra. She had gone very still. The amusement was entirely gone from her face. She was looking at me the way people look at something they're not sure is stable, with the careful attention of someone who has realized that the situation they thought they understood is different from the one they're actually in. I reached into my bag. My phone was there. I looked at the screen. I typed one message. It was 7 words. It was to my father's number, which was no longer my father's number because my father had been dead for 6 years, but I had transferred the line to someone else the year after he died, and that someone had been waiting for this message for 3 months. I hit send at 7:24 p.m. I put the phone back. I looked at Callum. "Dad," I said quietly. "It's time." Part 3. He stared at me. "What does that mean?" he said. I said nothing. "Ingrid, what does that mean?" I let the silence hold. Petra was watching me. Her arms were at her sides now. The champagne-colored dress looked different without the confidence she'd been wearing with it. "What are you doing?" Callum said. His voice had an edge I recognized. Not anger. Something closer to the feeling that arrives when a man realizes he doesn't understand the situation he's in. I didn't answer. Dorth had not moved from beside Callum. She placed a hand on his arm. Her eyes were on me. "Ingrid," she said. Her voice was measured and low. "Everyone is watching. Let's step outside and—" "I'm fine where I am," I said. She blinked. In 8 years, I had never interrupted her. "There's no need to make this more." I said I'm fine where I am, Dorth. The second use of her name alone, without the courtesy title, landed differently. I could see it in the line of her shoulder. She turned to Callum. "What is happening?" "I don't know," he said. And he didn't. That was true. Around us, the room had not returned to normal. The string quartet had stopped playing and had not started again. Conversations had stalled at nearby tables. Employees who had been circulating were standing still. A few people were looking at their phones. I noted all of it without turning my head. I had planned this gala. I knew the layout of this room. I knew that the main entrance, the ballroom's large double doors on the north wall, was 40 feet from where I was standing. I looked at those doors. "This is embarrassing," Dorth said, low and precise. "For everyone. For Callum's employees. For this family. If you have a grievance, Ingrid, there is a process for." "A process," I said. "A private process. Between family members." "Not," she gestured at the room, "this." "This," I said, "was not my choice." She drew a breath. "I understand you're upset. I understand something happened just now that shouldn't have." She paused. She would not say it. She could not make herself say it. I noted that too. But there are ways to handle things. There are ways that protect the company, protect the family's standing. "The family's standing," I said. "Yes." She said it firmly. "This company has a reputation. This family has a reputation. And whatever has happened between you and Callum is a private matter, and it should stay." "I organized this event," I said. She stopped. "For months," I said. 2 drives down the coast in January. The venue contract. The catering. The seating chart. The AV setup. I did that. Not as a favor. Not because I was helpful. Because I have been doing the work of someone who belongs to this family for 8 years while being treated by you, specifically, as someone who is tolerated by it." Her face went still. "That is not." "The trust revision," I said. "November. 4 years ago. You described it as an administrative simplification." Callum said, "What?" I didn't look at him. "It would have dissolved my interest in the Warrenton property," I said to Dorth. "The property my father's boatyard used to border. The property with the shared access road to the Harbor Authority's secondary dock. The property we purchased for $187,000 and which is now worth more than 4 times that." "Which you knew." Callum said, "What property?" "You knew I'd seen the revision," I said to Dorth. "You moved forward anyway because you assumed I wouldn't say anything. Because in 8 years I hadn't said anything. Because I was the wife who organized the events and drove down the coast in January and made the soup less salty and didn't make it an issue." Dorth's hands were very still at her sides. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are confused about." "I'm not confused," I said. "The trust document." "I have the trust document," I said. "I have the original and the revision. I have the attorney's notes from the November meeting. I have the email in which you described the change as an administrative adjustment." The color left her face. Callum said, "Ingrid." "I also have my father's records," I said. 30 years of marine freight contracts and harbor authority correspondence. Including the original agreement that gave your father the preferential mooring rights at the Astoria terminal. The agreement that was a personal arrangement between Henning Osgood and Rita Halvorsen. Not a company arrangement. A personal one. Based on my father's word and my father's relationship with the harbor board. Which is why, when Henning built the company, his terminal access cost him 40% less than his nearest competitor for 11 years. The room was very quiet now. Not the quiet of people pretending not to listen. The actual quiet of 400 people who had stopped pretending. Henning, still at his table, had not moved. But his eyes were on me. They were steady and they were old and they were not surprised. He knew what I was describing. He had always known. Callum said, That's not." "I have the ledger," I said. "My father kept a ledger. He kept everything. It's in his office. I have had access to that office since he died." I opened my bag. Inside, folded into thirds, was a piece of paper. Not the ledger itself. The ledger was in the cedar office at the boatyard, where it had been for 6 years, where it would remain. This was a copy of the first page. The date. The names. The figure. The harbor board stamp. I reached into the bag and my fingers closed on the folded paper. I slid it across the high-top table beside us. A tall table near the edge of the dance floor, empty, someone's abandoned drink ring still on the white cloth. Then I stepped back, unfolded it slowly along its creases and laid it flat. It sat there. Dorth looked at it. Callum looked at it. Neither of them moved. The ballroom doors were behind me. I knew without looking that they were opening. I had sent the message at 7:24 p.m. It was now 7:34 p.m. I had told him 10 minutes. The sound came first. Not a loud sound. Just the specific sound of those large doors moving on their hardware, and then the particular shift in the room's acoustics that happens when a space opens. Then the sound of the room itself changing. Someone stood up. I heard the chair. Then another. Then, from somewhere near the front, a board member, I knew his voice, said something I couldn't make out, and the energy in the room restructured itself the way it does when someone with authority enters a space. I did not turn around. I watched Callum's face. I watched it move through several expressions in a short time. Confusion. Recognition. Something I had never seen on him before, which was the specific look of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on was not what he thought it was. I watched Dorth's face. She was looking past me, at the doors, at whatever was behind me. The color had not returned. Her hands were very still. I turned around. The man who walked through those ballroom doors had worked beside my father for 22 years, and he walked the way my father walked. Measured, unhurried, the walk of a man who had spent decades on wet dock planking where rushing got people hurt. His name was Arvid Steen. He was 67 years old. He had run the Harbor Board's compliance office in Astoria for 11 years before he retired, and before that he had been my father's closest friend, his business partner in 2 commercial fishing vessel commissions, and the man who had witnessed every significant document my father had signed in the last decade of his life. He was not alone. Behind him came 2 men I recognized from the Harbor Authority's regional office in Astoria. Behind them came a woman in a gray blazer whose posture said attorney clearly enough that several people nearby shifted in their seats. Behind her came a man Callum knew. I could tell from the way Callum's face changed. A man named Darren Solis who sat on the Oregon Marine Commerce Board and who had been, for the past 4 years, quietly reviewing the historical preferential access agreements at the Astoria terminal as part of a broader port modernization audit. Arvid stopped beside me. He looked at Callum. He looked at Dorth. He looked at the document lying open on the high-top table. Ingrid, he said. Arvid, I said. He nodded once. Then he looked at the room, at the employees standing, at the board members near the front who had risen when they recognized Darren Solis, at the general stillness of 400 people who had been at a company gala 40 minutes ago and were now somewhere else entirely. Should we sit? He said. Let's stand, I said. Callum said, What is this? I looked at him. This, I said, is the process. He stared at me. What process? What are you? You said there was a process, I said. 4 grievances. 4 private matters. I looked at Dorth. You said there are ways that protect the company. Protect the family's standing. Dorth had not moved. She was standing very straight. Her eyes had gone to Arvid and then to Darren Solis and then back to me. Ingrid, she said. Her voice was careful. Whatever you believe you have. I'm going to talk about the document now, I said. She stopped. Callum looked at Solis. You're auditing us? We're auditing the historical record, Solis said. The Osgood Terminal Agreement is one of 14 preferential access arrangements from before 1995 that are under review. The question is whether they've been properly disclosed and whether they represent an ongoing commercial advantage that should be renegotiated or formalized. Renegotiated, Callum said. At current commercial rates, Solis said. For the period in question. I watched Callum calculate that. I had already calculated it. 8 years at the rate differential. 18% of the terminal's mooring fees across the volume the Osgood Company ran through Astoria. It was not a small number. It was not a number that would break the company, but it was a number that would require a formal, documented, attorney-present conversation with the harbor authority. "I'd like to read you the document," I said. Callum said, "That's not necessary." "It is," I said, "because your mother described it as something that doesn't exist. And your father knows what it says. And I want everyone in this room to hear it the same way." Dorth said, "This is absurd. This is a document from before Callum was." "Dorth," Henning said. It was the first thing he'd said. He was still at his table. He hadn't moved. But his voice had the quality of a man who had been waiting to speak and had chosen his moment. Dorth looked at him. "Don't," he said. She closed her mouth. Henning looked at me. His eyes were steady. Old. He looked, for a moment, exactly like the man my father had described to me when I was young, a man who did things the way he chose to do them and accepted the consequences of that. "The arrangement was Ryda's generosity," he said. "I knew it. I should have formalized it properly. I didn't." He paused. "That's on me." The room absorbed that. Callum looked at his father. Then at me. Then at the document. The document read, in the upper margin, March 14, 1987. It named Ryda Halvorsen. It named Henning Osgood. It described, in 2 plain paragraphs in my father's careful print, the terms by which Henning Osgood's marine freight operation would receive preferential mooring access at the Astoria terminal at a rate set 18% below the commercial standard, in exchange for a reciprocal arrangement in which my father's boatyard received priority dry dock scheduling for Osgood Company vessels for a period of not less than 15 years. The harbor board stamp was in the upper right corner. "This is 39 years old," Callum said. "And it's been in effect for 39 years, I said. "Including the last 8, while you've been running the company. Including the last 4, while the Marine Commerce Board has been auditing historical access agreements." I looked at Darren Solis. "Is that accurate?" "The Osgood Terminal Agreement has been flagged in our review for the past 22 months, Solis said. Callum was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" he said. I looked at him. "You told your executive assistant," I said, "that I have difficulty with my role here." He didn't answer. "You said I tend to micromanage." Still nothing. "You let her stand in a room full of your employees and call me pathetic." His jaw tightened. "And then you struck me." The word struck was deliberate. I had chosen it in the restroom earlier that evening, when I was composing my face in the mirror and thinking about the words I might need. Struck was the precise word. It was not softened. It was not dramatic. It was accurate. "I didn't," he started. 400 people, I said. "And cameras." I looked at the AV setup in the far corner. The camera that had been recording the founder's reel earlier. I had not confirmed whether it was still running. But it was pointed at the room and it had been running at 7:24 p.m., and some things you don't need to confirm because the possibility is enough. Callum looked at the camera. He looked back at me. "Ingrid," he said. His voice had changed again. Softer now. The voice he used when he was trying to find a way back into a room he'd locked himself out of. I reacted. I shouldn't have. I'm not going to defend that. "No," I said. "You're not." Dorth said, "We should take this somewhere private. This is a company event. These are employees. Whatever needs to be said can be." "You said," I told her, "that there are ways that protect the company. That protect the family's standing." She looked at me. "You said that," I said, "for minutes after your son struck me in front of 400 people. You were protecting the company's standing." I was trying to. "And you said," I continued, "that I've been along for this family. Along for the company. That I haven't built anything." Her voice was very measured. I didn't say. "Petra said it," I said, in the words Callum gave her. Callum said nothing. 4 months of event planning, I said to Dorth. 11 weeks on the Grays Harbor acquisition. 6 weeks of driving to Seaside twice a week. 40 hours on the Warrenton documentation. And 39 years of my father's goodwill still sitting in your terminal's mooring rates. I paused. Which of those things is being along for it? The color had not returned to her face. The trust revision, I said. November. 4 years ago. You described it as an administrative simplification. It would have dissolved my interest in the Warrenton property. You moved forward because you assumed I hadn't noticed. Because in 8 years I hadn't said a word. She said nothing. I looked at Callum. I want the Warrenton property transferred to my name alone, I said. Not jointly held. Mine. He was very still. I want a formal accounting of my contributions to this company over the past 8 years. Not informal. Not verbal. A documented accounting, prepared by an independent CPA, that reflects the work I did on the Grays Harbor acquisition, the Warrenton dispute, and every other piece of work I performed that benefited this business. Arvid beside me was writing something on a small notepad. He had been my father's bookkeeper once. He was very fast. And I want an acknowledgement, I said. In writing. From you and from your mother. That what happened tonight happened. That I did not raise my voice. That I did not make a scene. That I stood in this room and was called pathetic and was struck by my husband and I did not raise my voice. The room was absolutely still. Callum's face had settled into something I had not seen before. Not anger. Not the adjustment expression from earlier. Something older. The face of a man who had believed for 8 years that he understood the arrangement he was in, and who had just understood that he hadn't. He said, and if I don't? Then the Harbor Board will formalize its review, I said. Darren Solis will complete the audit. The 39 years of preferential access will be calculated at the rate differential and presented as an outstanding obligation. And I will speak to an attorney about tonight. I looked at Petra, who had moved to the far edge of our group and was standing very still with her arms at her sides. I think, I said to Callum, that you've told Petra a lot of things. He said nothing. You said that to me, I said. You said she tells me a lot of things, as though that were a fact about your relationship that you wanted me to know. That was unkind. Deliberately unkind. In a room full of your employees. His face was unreadable. That's fine, I said. I'm telling you now, whatever you've told her about me, whatever you've told her about this marriage, whatever you've told her about my role here, she knows now what the role was. So do 400 other people. I picked up the document from the table. I folded it slowly along its original creases. One fold, then the second. I held it for a moment and then I placed it in my bag. I looked at Callum. You said I was making a scene, I said. I wasn't. This is the difference. I looked at Dorth. You said the family's standing needs protecting. I organized this event. I drove to Seaside in February rain. I found the errors in the Grays Harbor filing. If that's what along for it looks like, then you have a problem with your definitions. I looked at Henning, who was still at his table. He had not looked away from me since he'd spoken. My father spoke highly of you, I said. For most of his life. I'm going to hold on to that. Henning said nothing. But he nodded. Once. Slowly. I looked back at Callum. Don't call me tonight, I said. Call your attorney. I picked up my bag. I walked toward the ballroom doors. I did not slam them. They were heavy doors on commercial hardware, and they swung closed behind me with the slow hydraulic certainty of something that had been properly installed, and the sound they made was not a bang but a long, quiet exhale. The lobby of the Meridian Grand was empty. The coat check attendant looked up and then looked back down. My heels were loud on the stone floor. I walked to the far end of the lobby, near the windows that looked out over the Columbia, and I stood there. The rain was still moving against the glass. The river was dark and wide. A ferry horn sounded somewhere in the distance, one long note, then silence. I took the key out of my bag. It was small. Worn smooth where my father's thumb had held it for 30 years. The metal was the color of old pewter. It had a small tag on it, a piece of white tape with the letters RH written in my father's hand. Rita Halvorsen, in the particular print he used for labels on things he considered permanent. I held it in my palm. My father had taught me to read the water before I could read words. He taught me that the surface of the water tells you one thing and the current tells you another, and the only way to know what you're actually working with is to pay attention to both for long enough. He said that about the river. He said that about people. He said it about contracts and partnerships and the particular human tendency to believe that what was said and what was meant were the same thing. I had been paying attention for 8 years. I closed my hand around the key. Behind me, through the lobby, I could hear the murmur of the ballroom. 400 people. The soft hydraulic exhale of doors. A man's voice, not Callum's, someone else's, saying something I couldn't make out. Arvid came through the lobby doors 2 minutes later. He stopped beside me and looked out at the river. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at the side of my face. I had not looked in a mirror since it happened. I didn't need to. "Your father would have been very still," Arvid said. "In that room. Just like you were." I didn't answer. We stood there for a moment. The river moved. The rain moved. The ferry horn sounded again, further away now, heading toward the Washington side. "The attorney will reach out to Callum's counsel by Thursday," Arvid said. "So Lisa's office will send the formal audit notification by end of week." "I know," I said. "The document." "I have it," I said. He nodded. "You're not done with this," he said. It was not a question. He meant the process, the attorney, the months ahead. He meant the mornings that would follow this one. He'd seen my father through something similar once, a long dispute with a port supplier that had lasted 2 years and resolved the way most things resolved, slowly, through documented patience. "No," I said. "I'm not." "Do you want company tonight?" he said. "I'm all right," I said. He looked at me for a moment longer. "Rita would have said the same thing," he said. "He would have been wrong too. But I'll let you be." He went back through the lobby doors. I stood at the window. I thought about the first time my father brought me to the boatyard. I was 6 years old. He lifted me up onto the railing of a commercial trawler that was in dry dock for hull maintenance, and I could see for the first time how the hull looked below the waterline. Dark and barnacled and enormous, the hidden part that nobody saw when the boat was working. He said, "This is the part that matters. Everything above the water is just presentation." I had thought about that a great deal in 8 years. I thought about it standing at that window, with the river in front of me and the key in my hand and the murmur of 400 people still carrying faintly through the lobby walls. I thought about all the things I had done below the waterline, all the work that had kept the hull clean while everyone stood on the deck looking at the view. I had never asked to be seen doing it. I had simply done it and trusted that the record would be there when it was needed. The record was there. I put the key back in my bag. I don't know if I did the right thing in the way people mean that question, whether the scale of it, the room, the 400 people, the documents, Arvid standing beside me, was proportionate to what had been done. I have turned that question over many times in the months since. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is this: I stood in that room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I said what was true with the evidence my father kept, and I let the room be what it was. My father believed that the difference between a man who lasted and a man who didn't was whether he paid attention to the things no one was watching. He worked by that for 30 years. He kept his records. He kept his word. He trusted that the details would matter eventually. They mattered. If any part of this story stayed with you, if you've ever stood in a room and held your voice while someone decided who you were, I'd be glad to know it reached you. Leave a comment. It helps more than you might think. I walked out of the Meridian Grand at 8:02 p.m. The rain had slowed. The parking lot smelled of salt and wet pavement and somewhere, faintly, diesel from the river traffic. I got into my car. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I drove home along the coast road in the dark, with the river on my left and the evergreens on my right, and the key in my bag, and the quiet that my father taught me to trust.